The man who shuffled into the St. Gregory Grand Hotel looked as if he'd been carved from dust and despair. His coat, a relic of indeterminate wool, was frayed at the cuffs and bore the ghostly outlines of long-vanished buttons. His boots were the kind worn by men who walk on gravel all day and sleep on cardboard at night, caked with a mud that was foreign to the pristine, checkerboard marble of the Boston lobby. In the cathedral-like silence that fell, the only sound was the faint, gritty scrape of his soles on the floor, an affront to the generations of Polish that had sanctified the space. The concierge, a man named Julian Croft, whose posture was as starched as his collar, froze with a silver letter opener halfway to an envelope. Guests sipping afternoon tea in the adjacent palm court paused, their porcelain cups hovering mid-air. They saw a vagrant, a problem to be removed, another crack in the city's perfect facade. But they were all making a mistake, a gross miscalculation that would unravel their comfortable world. Only one person, a waitress named Clara Jenkins, who was polishing silverware with a rag worn thin as a whisper, saw something more. She was the only one in that entire opulent cavern who could understand the guttural, desperate words he was muttering to himself. And when she finally acted, the truth she unearthed would not just shatter the silence, it would detonate a bomb buried for 30 years and change her own life in the blast. You will not believe what this man was truly searching for. The chandeliers of the St. Gregory Grand were not mere light fixtures. They were constellations of Austrian crystal, each one costing more than the 4-year history degree Clara was drowning in debt to acquire. They cast a cold, unforgiving light on everything, including the microscopic smudge on the fork she was polishing. Clara rubbed it harder, her knuckles aching. Her life was a study in relentless friction, the friction of her worn-out shoes against the floor for 10 hours a day, the friction of her dwindling bank account against the mountain of her late grandfather's medical bills. She'd taken this job because the St. Gregory was a Boston institution, and the tips, supposedly, were legendary. The reality was a pittance, doled out by people who thought a $5 bill was a generous reward for an hour of her life. The real price of admission was enduring Julian Croft. Jenkins, Table 7 wants a fresh pot of the Earl Grey. And for God's sake, try to look like you belong here, not like you're mourning the death of a pet hamster. Julian's voice slithered over her shoulder, a cocktail of entitlement and cheap cologne. He was the hotel owner's son, a fact he wielded like a weapon. His suits were sharp, his smile was sharper, and his soul was the dullest thing in the room. "Right away, Mr. Croft," Clara murmured, not meeting his eyes. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you," he snapped. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "We have the Historical Preservation Society touring this afternoon. They're considering our application for landmark status. The last thing I need is them seeing a waitress who looks like she just crawled out of a public library's basement." Smile. It's not that hard. Clara forced her lips into a shape that vaguely resembled a smile. It felt like cracking plaster. She couldn't afford to lose this job. The final notice for her grandfather's oncology bills was tucked in her purse, a crisp, white harbinger of doom. He had been a history professor, a kind man who had filled her childhood with stories of forgotten empires and fallen kings. He taught her that every object, every person, had a story. Now, his own story was ending in a pile of invoices she couldn't pay. She fetched the silver teapot, her reflection a warped, exhausted stranger in its polished surface. The lobby was a symphony of discreet wealth. Lawyers in pinstripes discussed billion-dollar mergers in hushed tones. Women with surgically tightened faces laughed over cucumber sandwiches, their diamonds flashing like distress signals. It was a world so far removed from her own that serving them felt like being a ghost at a feast. Then, the great revolving doors, polished brass and beveled glass, groaned as they admitted him. The man of dust and despair. The symphony of the lobby stuttered and died. Conversations trailed off. Silverware clinked to a halt. Every eye was drawn to the anomaly, the piece that didn't fit. He was of medium height, but seemed smaller, hunched under the weight of his own existence. His face was a road map of hardship, weathered and creased, with a beard that was more salt than pepper. But it was his eyes that snared Clara's attention from across the vast expanse of marble. They were a pale, watery blue, scanning the lobby not with intent, but with a frantic, desperate confusion, like a man searching for a landmark in a city he no longer recognized. He clutched a worn leather satchel to his chest as if it contained his own heart. Julian Croft, who had been charming a wealthy-looking woman near the reception desk, went rigid. His practiced smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. Clara saw the shift, the flicker of predatory glee in his eyes. Julian didn't just dislike conflict, he savored it, especially when he held all the power. "Security must be on a coffee break," Julian muttered, loud enough for those around him to hear and titter in agreement. He straightened his silk tie and began his march across the lobby, his handmade Italian shoes clicking with the sharp report of a guillotine. Clara should have turned away. She should have delivered the tea to table 7. But she couldn't. Something in the man's posture, a profound and hopeless weariness, resonated with the ache in her own bones. She had seen that look before, in the mirror, on the morning she'd received the final bill from the hospital. The man took a few shuffling steps toward the reception desk. The 2 receptionists, models of polished indifference, suddenly became fascinated by their computer screens. He reached the desk, leaning against the mahogany, and spoke. His voice was a low rasp, thick with an accent she couldn't immediately place. "Room 713, he said, the words broken, as if he were assembling them from a foreign language instruction manual. "I must see." Julian arrived, planting himself directly in the man's path. He didn't get too close, maintaining a sanitary distance of about 5 feet. "I'm afraid you've taken a wrong turn," Julian said, his voice a weapon wrapped in velvet. "The city shelter is on the other side of the common. This is a private hotel for guests." The man blinked, his gaze dropping from Julian's perfectly coiffed hair to his own ruined boots. He didn't seem to register the insult, or perhaps he had weathered so many that one more was meaningless. He clutched his satchel tighter. "No shelter," he insisted, shaking his head. "Hotel, St. Gregory. Room 713. He fumbled inside his coat and produced a single, old-fashioned brass key, the kind with a heavy, ornate fob. It was tarnished with age. A wave of derisive chuckles rippled through the palm court. A man in a cashmere sweater whispered to his companion. "He probably found that in a gutter. Thinks it's the key to the city." Julian let out a theatrical sigh of exasperation. "Sir, I assure you, that key hasn't opened a door in this hotel since we switched to electronic keycards 30 years ago. Now, you are disturbing our patrons. I'm going to ask you to leave. Now." The man's confusion curdled into frustration. His brow furrowed. He tried again, pointing to the key, then up at the ceiling, as if indicating the floors above. The English words deserted him, replaced by a torrent of desperate, foreign speech. "Me mchirdeba is Rakdavtov, Korgashoft, Kemiojaki, es aris Quelafere." The words were harsh, filled with guttural stops and soft vowels that sounded alien and threatening in the refined air of the lobby. Julian recoiled as if he'd been spat upon. Right, that's it. He's drunk or insane, Julian announced to the room at large. He snapped his fingers, a gesture he usually reserved for bus boys. Security, get this lunatic out of my lobby. A security guard, a burly former cop named Frank, began to lumber over, his expression one of weary resignation. He was a decent man, but his job was to follow orders. Clara watched, the silver teapot growing heavy in her hand. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She knew that language. It wasn't Russian, it wasn't Polish. It was Georgian. Her grandfather had been a specialist in Soviet history, his passion focusing on the small republics swallowed by the USSR. He had collected books, maps, and even learned the language, teaching it to her during long summer afternoons, spent in his dusty study. To understand a people, Clara Bell. He used to say, "You must understand their words." She saw the scene through his eyes. A man displaced, a man unheard, screaming in a language no one understood. She saw Julian, the petty tyrant, puffing up his chest, performing for his audience of elites. She saw the guard, Frank, preparing to put his hands on the old man. She made a choice. It was a foolish, reckless choice that would undoubtedly cost her the job she so desperately needed. It meant the Bills would win. But to stand by and watch this small, final dignity be stripped from a fellow human being felt like a betrayal of everything her grandfather had taught her. She set the teapot down on a vacant table with a decisive clink. "Jenkins!" Julian's voice cracked like a whip. "I swear to God, if you leave your station—" She ignored him. With a deep breath, she walked across the marble floor, her sensible black shoes making no sound. She walked past the gawking faces, past the sneer on Julian's face, and stopped directly between the advancing security guard and the bewildered stranger. She looked up at the man. Up close, he smelled of damp wool, rain, and something metallic, like old coins. His eyes, when they met hers, were filled with the terror of a cornered animal. Clara took another breath and spoke in the language of his heart. "Shegitsliat, damex marot, tuven vinmes edzept." "Can I help you? Are you looking for someone?" The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The man's frantic energy vanished, replaced by a stillness so profound it seemed the very air had frozen around him. The desperation in his eyes was washed away by a tidal wave of stunned disbelief. He stared down at the young waitress in her simple black and white uniform, as if she were a mirage. "Tuven saubrobt kartulad?" You speak Georgian," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Tsitsota," Clara replied, keeping her voice soft and calm. "Babuachema mastsavla." "A little. My grandfather taught me." Behind her, Julian Croft was practically vibrating with rage. "What in the hell do you think you're doing, Jenkins? Are you conspiring with this person? Step away from him. He could be dangerous." Clara half-turned, her body still a shield between the two men. "He's not dangerous, Mr. Croft. He's lost. He doesn't understand you." "I don't pay you to be a UN translator," Julian hissed, his face mottling with color. "I pay you to serve tea. Tell this bum to get out, or you can follow him right through that revolving door." The stranger, seeing the aggression in Julian's face, took a protective step forward. He ignored the manager completely now, his focus entirely on Clara. He held out the old brass key to her. "Ksoft," he pleaded, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Dabruneba mehirdeba, otaxi nomeri shviditsameti." "Please, I need to get it back. Room 713. Clara took the key. Its weight surprised her. It felt solid, real, a relic from another time. "He says he left something in room 713, she translated, turning to Julian. "A long time ago. He just wants to get it back." "A long time ago," Julian scoffed, crossing his arms. "That's rich. Room 713 was part of the full 7th floor renovation in '98. It's now the McKinley Suites master bathroom. Whatever he thinks he left is long gone, probably in a landfill. He's clearly mentally unwell." The man heard the room number and the word "gone." His face crumpled. Ara is aiku under ios, kedelshi." No, it must be there. In the wall." "He says it's in the wall," Clara said, a knot of pity tightening in her chest. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Julian groaned, rolling his eyes. "This is a farce." "Frank, get him out of here. Jenkins, you go to my office. We're going to have a long talk about your termination." Frank moved in, placing a heavy hand on the man's shoulder. The stranger flinched violently, knocking the hand away. "Armekare!" "Don't touch me!" he roared, the sound echoing through the cavernous lobby. The roar broke the spell. A woman shrieked. Guests began gathering their belongings. Julian's face lit up with vindication. "He's violent! He just assaulted my staff! Call the police! Call them now!" The lobby descended into chaos. The man was backed against the reception desk, his chest heaving, his eyes wild with betrayal. He looked at Clara, and she saw in his gaze the terrible thought that she had been part of the trap all along. "Stop!" Clara shouted, her voice ringing with an authority she didn't know she possessed. She turned on Julian, her eyes blazing. "Mr. Croft, give me 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes. I can get him to leave peacefully. If you call the police, this will be on the evening news. St. Gregory Grand manhandles confused elderly refugee. How will that look for your landmark status application?" Julian paused. The mention of the landmark status was a perfectly aimed dart. He was a vain, cruel man, but his vanity outweighed his cruelty. He cared, above all else, about appearances. He glared at her, his eyes cold slits of fury. "You have 60 seconds, Jenkins," he spat. "Get him out the back service entrance, and then you're finished." Clara didn't waste a second on him. She turned back to the man, speaking quickly and urgently in Georgian. "Momenin, mistsmen, mapatie, isini tikvens, tkivils apirben, chven undatsavidet, me dagexmarabi, magram ara ak." "Listen to me. Do you hear me? I'm sorry. They are going to hurt you. We have to go. I will help you. But not here." He stared at her, his breathing ragged. He looked at Frank, who was flexing his hands. He looked at the guests, staring at him like he was an animal in a zoo. Then he looked back at Clara and saw the genuine concern in her eyes. "Shen, damex marebi?" "You will help me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Clara said, switching to English so the guard could understand. "I'll help. Come with me." She didn't lead him toward the front door or the back exit. She led him toward the employee elevator, hidden behind a paneled wall near the kitchens. The crowd of wealthy guests parted before them, pulling their designer bags and silk scarves away, as if his poverty were contagious. As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing them in a small, sterile box, the cacophony of the lobby was replaced by a humming silence. The man leaned his head against the cool steel wall and closed his eyes. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on his cheek. "Thank you," he murmured in broken English. "Don't thank me yet," Clara said, her own future a terrifying blank. She pressed the button for the basement. "First, we need to figure out who you are." She glanced down at the worn leather satchel he was still clutching, as if it were a holy relic. It was old, the leather cracked, but she noticed the hardware. The buckles and the lock were made of a heavy, non-tarnishing metal, and on the front, almost completely faded, was a small, embossed crest. a double-headed eagle. It was the crest of the old Byzantine Empire, a symbol often adopted by Eastern European nobility. Her grandfather had a book filled with them. This was no ordinary vagrant. This was a man with a history that had just collided with her own. And in the fluorescent hum of the descending elevator, Clara had the sinking feeling that her troubles had only just begun. The basement of the St. Gregory Grand was a fluorescent-lit labyrinth of concrete floors and sweating pipes. It smelled of industrial-grade disinfectant, stale coffee, and the quiet desperation of the hourly wage worker. It was the hotel's subconscious, the grimy, functional space that allowed the opulence upstairs to exist. Clara led the man to the employee break room, a soulless chamber with mismatched plastic chairs and a vending machine that exclusively stole your change. A couple of kitchen porters were on a break, scrolling through their phones. They looked up, their eyes widening at the sight of the disheveled stranger, but Clara shot them a look that dared them to comment. They quickly returned to their screens. She guided him to a chair in the corner, a small island of relative privacy. She used her own money, the last $3 she had for the bus ride home, to buy him a bottle of water and a packet of crackers from the machine. She poured him a mug of the thick, bitter coffee that was perpetually brewing. "Here," she said softly, placing the items on the table before him. "It's not much." He looked at the meager offering as if it were a feast. He nodded his thanks, his large, work-roughened hands fumbling with the cap on the water bottle. He drank half of it in a single, desperate motion, his throat working. Clara sat across from him, the tarnished brass key on the table between them like a chess piece in a game she didn't understand. She watched him eat the crackers, methodically, one by one, as if he hadn't eaten in days. The lines on his face seemed deeper in the harsh light, canyons carved by years of sorrow. She waited until he was finished before she spoke, keeping her voice low. "The manager upstairs, Mr. Croft. He's going to fire me for this." The man looked up, his pale blue eyes filled with a weary sadness. "I am sorry. For you, trouble." "It's not your fault," Clara said, though it was. "He's a bully. He was looking for an excuse." She leaned forward slightly. "But I have to know. Why are you here? What is in room 713 that is so important?" He looked at the door, then back at her, a lifetime of caution in his gaze. He seemed to be weighing her, judging her character. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision. "Not what?" he said, his voice a low rumble. "Who? My history. My soul." He tapped the worn leather satchel. "My name is Alexander Volkov." The name meant nothing to Clara. 30 years ago, he began, his English slow and deliberate, each word costing him an effort. My country, Georgia, was breaking from Soviet Union. It was time of chaos, of danger. My family, we were old family, not liked by communists. They take everything, our home, our land, but they not find everything. He paused, taking a sip of the cold coffee. "My mother, before she died, she give me this." He patted the satchel, and she give me that. He pointed a trembling finger at the key on the table. She say, "Sasha, you must go. Go to America. There is friend of your grandfather at St. Gregory Grand Hotel. He is head of maintenance. His name is Pyotr. He will help you hide our story until it is safe to return." Clara's mind raced. "So you came here as a refugee?" Alexander nodded. "I was young, 20 years old, scared. I find Pyotr. He was old man, kind man, he understand. Together we hide it, in wall of storage closet. Room 7-13. He give me key. He say, 'One day you come back for it.'" He looked down at his hands. "I work. I clean dishes in restaurant down street. I save money. But I get news. My sister, she is sick back home. I must send all money. Then, Pyotr die. Heart attack. I have no one here. I try to come back, but hotel has new owner, new security. They throw me out. I am nobody. So you left, Clara whispered, imagining the young, terrified boy he must have been. I had to live, he said simply. I go west, work oil fields in Texas, construction in California. I learn English, I learn business. I make money. A lot of money. He looked up, and his eyes, for the first time, held a flicker of steel. Now I am back. For my story. Clara stared at him, at the frayed coat and the muddy boots. If you have a lot of money, why are you dressed like this? Why not just walk in, book the suite, and hire someone to find what you're looking for? A bitter smile touched Alexander's lips. Because money makes people liars. If I come in fancy suit, with lawyers, this Mr. Croft, he smiles. He helps, but he tries to find out what is so valuable. He tries to take it. I know men like him. They smell money like sharks smell blood. I come like this, as the boy I was, to see the true heart of this place, to see if anything has changed. He looked directly at Clara, his gaze softening. It has not. It is still a place that kicks the weak. Except for you. You have heart of your grandfather, the kind man. Before Clara could process the compliment, the break-room door slammed open with such force it hit the wall with a deafening crack. Julian Croft stood framed in the doorway, his face a mask of triumphant fury. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood Frank, the security guard, and 2 uniformed Boston police officers. "There he is," Julian shouted, pointing a dramatic, trembling finger at Alexander. "Hiding in the basement with his accomplice." Clara leaped to her feet, instinctively stepping in front of Alexander again. "Mr. Croft, please. This is a misunderstanding. He's just an old man who is confused." "Oh, I am not confused, Jenkins," Julian sneered, striding into the room. The kitchen porters scattered like mice. "You're fired. I want you to clear out your locker and be off the premises in 5 minutes." He then turned his venomous gaze on Alexander, who remained seated, watching the scene with a strange, unnerving calm. "Officers," Julian said, his voice ringing with authority. "This man was trespassing in the lobby, creating a public disturbance, and when my security guard tried to escort him out, he became violent." One of the officers, a world-weary sergeant with a name tag that read Donovan, stepped forward. "All right, pal, on your feet. Let's take a walk." Alexander slowly rose. He seemed to grow taller, his hunched posture straightening. He held his hands out, palms open. "I will come, no trouble." "Wait," Julian said suddenly. His eyes, sharp and greedy, had fixated on the leather satchel that Alexander had placed on the table. He saw the faded crest, the heavy, expensive-looking hardware. "What's in the bag?" he demanded. Alexander didn't answer. "He's a thief," Julian declared, his voice rising with theatrical certainty. "He must have stolen that from a guest's room. Look at it, that's antique. Officers, I want you to add theft to the charges. Seize that bag as evidence," Clara gasped. "You can't do that. It's his. He's had it for 30 years. "And how would you know that, Jenkins?" Julian shot back. "Has he been whispering his life story to you in some gibberish language? You're probably in on it with him." He lunged for the satchel. It was the lunge that broke Alexander's calm. He didn't shout. He didn't shove. He moved with a speed that was utterly shocking for a man his size and apparent age. He simply placed his hand on the satchel, covering it. His fingers, thick and calloused, wrapped around Julian's slender wrist. "Do not," Alexander said, his voice low and devoid of any accent, "touch my property." The change was staggering. The broken, hesitant English was gone. In its place was a voice of pure, cold command. The grammar was perfect, the diction precise. He was still holding Julian's wrist, his grip like a vice. Julian's face went pale, a mixture of shock and pain. "Let go of me," he squeaked. "Assault! He's assaulting me!" Sergeant Donovan drew his baton. "Let him go now!" Alexander released Julian's wrist as if dropping a piece of trash. He turned his attention to the police officer. "Sergeant," he said, his voice calm and reasonable, "this man is making a false accusation. I am the legal owner of this property." Donovan was taken aback by the sudden fluency. "Look, sir, we can sort this out down at the station. For now, I need you to hand over the bag." "That will not be necessary," Alexander said. He reached slowly into the inner pocket of his tattered wool coat. For a heart-stopping moment, Clara thought he was reaching for a weapon. The officers tensed. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a slim, modern smartphone and a simple, elegant business card made of heavy, black cardstock. He handed the card to Sergeant Donovan. "Please call the number on that card," Alexander said. "Ask to speak with Mr. Marcus Thorne of the Thorne Capital Group. Tell him his associate, Alexander Volkov, is being detained at the St. Gregory Grand on the order of an employee named Julian Croft. Then give him this message. The eagle is in the nest." Sergeant Donovan looked at the card. Thorne Capital Group. He knew the name. Everyone in Boston knew the name. They were a massive private equity firm that had been buying up luxury properties all over the city. He looked from the expensive card to the man in the vagrant's clothes. Something wasn't adding up. Julian, however, was too committed to his narrative to see the ground crumbling beneath him. "A business card? Is that your brilliant plan? You think a bluff is going to save you? You're pathetic." He turned his scorn on Clara. "And you. Defending this con artist. I'm going to make sure you're blacklisted. You'll never serve another cup of tea in this city. You and your grandfather's memory can rot." The mention of her grandfather was a blow that landed harder than any physical strike. Tears of anger and humiliation sprang to Clara's eyes. "You're a monster," she whispered. "I'm a businessman," Julian corrected, straightening his tie, "and I'm taking out the trash." The second police officer, who had been quietly making the call on his own phone in the hallway, now hurried back into the room. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He leaned in and whispered frantically into Sergeant Donovan's ear. Donovan's face went slack. His eyes widened. He stared at Alexander, truly seeing him for the first time. The sharp intelligence in his eyes, the aristocratic set of his jaw beneath the beard, the aura of absolute authority. He holstered his baton. He took off his cap, holding it in his hands. "Mr. Volkov, sir," Donovan said, his voice suddenly filled with a deference that was utterly foreign to the situation. "My deepest apologies. There has been a profound misunderstanding." Julian's jaw dropped. "What? What are you talking about? Did you make the call?" "I did, Mr. Croft," Donovan said, turning a cold gaze on him. "And I suggest you listen very carefully. Thorne Capital Group completed their acquisition of the St. Gregory hotel chain 6 weeks ago. They are your new owners. And this man," he gestured to Alexander, "Mr. Alexander Volkov, is their chief operating officer, specializing in asset evaluation and management transition. He was sent here, incognito, to assess your performance." The silence that followed was a physical thing, a vacuum that sucked all the air and arrogance out of the room. Clara felt her head spin. Julian Croft's face cycled through a kaleidoscope of emotions: disbelief, confusion, dawning horror, and finally, pure, abject terror. He looked at the man in the filthy coat. He looked at the muddy boots. He looked at the pale blue eyes that were now fixed on him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an insect. "Owner?" Julian stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. "My official title is less important than my function," Alexander said, his voice as smooth and cold as the marble upstairs. He took a step toward Julian, who instinctively shrank back against a row of lockers. "For the past 3 days, I have observed your management style, Mr. Croft. I have seen you berate the housekeeping staff for being too slow. I have heard you mock the accents of the kitchen workers. And I have now personally experienced your customer service." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You told me this hotel was for guests. You are right. But you seem to have forgotten that the people who work here, the people who scrub the floors and wash the dishes, are the ones who make it a hotel and not just an empty building. You treat them like dirt. And you judged me by my clothes, assuming the worst of me because I did not meet your standards of wealth." Alexander's gaze flickered to Clara, and a hint of warmth entered his eyes. "Only one person in this entire establishment treated me with dignity. Only one person saw a human being instead of a problem." He turned back to the trembling manager. "You, Mr. Croft, are the problem." He looked at Sergeant Donovan. "Officers, I will not be pressing charges against you. You were misled. However," his eyes locked onto Julian, "I will be pressing charges against Mr. Croft for attempted theft of my personal property and for unlawful imprisonment. And as for his employment," Alexander smiled, a chilling, humorless expression. "Mr. Croft, you are terminated, effective immediately." "Frank," he said to the security guard who was standing frozen by the door, "please escort Mr. Croft off the premises. He has 5 minutes to clear out his office." "You can't do this!" Julian shrieked, his composure finally shattering. "My father sits on the board. He'll hear about this." "Your father was offered a generous retirement package last month," Alexander said mildly. "He is no longer on the board. He is, I believe, currently on a golf course in Florida. I doubt he will take your call." As Frank, with a look of grim satisfaction, took Julian by the arm, Alexander turned to Clara. She was leaning against the table, her knees weak, her mind trying to catch up with the seismic shift that had just occurred. "Miss Jenkins," Alexander said, his voice now gentle. "Yes." "Sir?" she stammered. "You are also terminated," he said. Clara's heart plummeted. Of course. She had still broken the rules. She had left her station. Alexander saw the look on her face, and his expression softened. "You are terminated from your position as a waitress. I am offering you a new position. I need someone to help me restore the soul of this hotel, someone who understands its history and who values people over polish." He gestured to the satchel on the table. "I also need help finding what's hidden in the walls. I believe a history student with a knowledge of this hotel's past and a command of the Georgian language would be uniquely qualified." He named a salary that made Clara's head swim, a figure that would not only pay her grandfather's bills, but would secure her future. "Will you accept?" Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but this time they were tears of overwhelming relief. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course, I accept." "Good," Alexander said. He picked up the old brass key from the table. "Then let's get to work. Our first task is to find out what really happened to room 713. They left the break room together, leaving the stunned police officers and the lingering ghost of Julian Croft's career behind them. As they rode the elevator up from the basement, no longer as a vagrant and a disgraced waitress, but as colleagues, Clara looked at the man beside her. He was still wearing the clothes of a pauper, but she saw him clearly now, a king in exile who had just returned to reclaim his kingdom. And she, somehow, was now a part of his story. The transition from the basement to the penthouse office, which had belonged to Julian Croft for all of 10 hours, was dizzying. The room was a monument to modern bad taste: chrome, glass, and a massive abstract painting that looked like a paint factory had exploded. Alexander surveyed it with a look of quiet disdain before sweeping a stack of glossy marketing brochures into a trash can. The heart of a hotel is not in its furniture, but in its memory, he murmured, more to himself than to Clara. He turned to her, his demeanor all business. The renovations, 1998. We need the architectural plans and the work orders. We need to see exactly what they did to the 7th floor. Clara, whose mind was a maelstrom of adrenaline, disbelief, and a terror so profound it felt like exhilaration, found herself sitting at Julian Croft's vast, sterile desk. The leather of the chair was cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the heat flushing her cheeks. The air still vibrated with the aftershocks of Julian's spectacular self-destruction. His cheap cologne lingered, a ghost of his vanquished arrogance. The computer screen glowed, a portal into the hotel's digital soul. His password, she discovered after a moment's thought that was equal parts intuition and contempt, was Set Gregory King Waitress. The pathetic vanity of it almost made her laugh, but the sound caught in her throat. For the next 3 hours, the penthouse office became a command center, a war room for a campaign fought 30 years in the past. Time seemed to warp and fold around them. Alexander, having shed the dusty coat which now lay draped over a minimalist chrome chair like a fallen banner, was a man transformed. The weariness in his posture was gone, replaced by a coiled, kinetic energy. His mind was a razor, slicing through decades of accumulated data. He paced the room, not with agitation, but with the measured tread of a general, recalling details of the hotel's layout from his brief, terrified stay, with a clarity that was nothing short of miraculous. He spoke of a service corridor behind the east wall, a specific pattern in the original parquet flooring, the scent of beeswax Pyotr used on the wood paneling. Clara, in turn, became the archaeologist of this buried kingdom. Her fingers, accustomed to polishing silver and carrying trays, now flew across the keyboard with a dancer's precision. She navigated the labyrinthine server, her academic training kicking in. This was not so different from sifting through archives for a thesis, searching for the one primary source document that could unlock a historical truth. She cross-referenced Alexander's memories with maintenance logs, supplier invoices, and staff rosters from the late 1980s. She found Pyotr's name, a ghost in the machine, listed as head of engineering and maintenance. She even found his retirement notice, dated 2 years after Alexander had fled. He hadn't died of a heart attack in the hotel. He had retired peacefully. A small, sad lie Alexander must have been told, or had assumed, in the chaos of his exile. "Here," she breathed, her voice hushed with reverence. She'd found the master file for the 1998 renovation project. A set of scanned blueprints materialized on the screen. This is the original floor plan from 1985. Room 713, a large linen and supply closet, exactly as you described. It shared a structural wall with the old governor's suite. Alexander leaned over her shoulder, his presence a solid, reassuring weight. The scent of rain and damp wool had been replaced by the clean, simple smell of soap. And the new plans? Clara's fingers clicked, and another, more modern schematic overlaid the first. The lines of room 713 were gone, swallowed whole by an expanded suite. They demolished the wall. The entire space was absorbed. It's the master bathroom of the McKinley suite now. A spa tub, a steam shower. It's all there. A profound stillness fell over Alexander. The energy drained from him, and for a moment the man of dust and despair returned. He sank into the chair opposite the desk, his broad shoulders slumping. "Demolished," he whispered, the word a death knell. 30 years, for nothing. It was all ground to dust and hauled away. The hope that had illuminated his features was extinguished, leaving behind the cold ash of defeat. He looked not like a Kwao, but like the refugee boy who had been turned away all those years ago. Clara's heart ached for him, but her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind, a gentle, scholarly persistence. "The story is never truly over, Clara Bell. Sometimes it's just hidden in the footnotes." "Wait," she said, her own hope a stubborn, flickering candle against the wind of his despair. This was a historic renovation. They were applying for grants even back then. There are protocols. You don't just take a sledgehammer to a building like this. Any contractor worth his salt would document everything they found. It's a legal necessity. A CYA, cover your assets. Log. Her eyes scanned the directory tree, flying past invoices and work schedules. She was looking for the footnotes, the appendices. Demolition survey. Hazardous material abatement. Asset relocation and salvage manifest. She clicked the last one. A new window opened, displaying a series of scanned, handwritten forms. The ink faded to a ghostly blue. The penmanship was a lazy, looping scrawl. "We're looking for any items logged from the 7th floor East Wing, specifically referencing room 713, around August 1998, she murmured, her focus absolute. She scrolled, page after digital page of banal entries. 12 brass sconces, oak panelling, 200 square 5 marble fireplace surrounds. Her pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It felt like searching for a single name in a vast, ancient cemetery. Then, at the bottom of page 15, her breath hitched. The entry was almost an afterthought, squeezed in below a note about plumbing fixtures. Item 713B, obstruction found in wall cavity, small cast iron safe, non-standard install. Contents unknown, unit locked. Per site foreman, J. Riley, moved to sub-basement deep archive for evaluation. Bay, 40 cents. Alexander was on his feet in an instant, the fatigue vanishing as if it had never been. He stared at the screen, his hand gripping the back of her chair. "A safe," he said, his voice thick with awe. "Pyotr. That clever, careful old man. He built a fortress for my story." He looked at Clara, and his pale blue eyes were not just hopeful, they were incandescent. "Clara Jenkins, you do not unearth history, you resurrect it." "Let's not start the resurrection just yet," she said, a smile finally breaking through her professional focus. "We have to descend into the underworld first." The sub-basement was not just a storage area. It was the hotel's collective unconscious, a catacomb of forgotten eras. The air was frigid and carried the layered sense of dust, decaying paper, and the faint metallic tang of rust. A single caged bulb cast long, dancing shadows that made the towering shelves of metal and wood look like the ribs of some great, sleeping beast. They found Bay 14 in the furthest, most neglected corner, behind a barricade of defunct, beige computer monitors from the dawn of the Internet age. Section C was a chaotic jumble of sealed crates, steamer trunks, and rolled-up carpets, all coated in a uniform grey shroud of dust. There were no labels, no order. It was a graveyard of abandoned things. For 2 hours they worked in the tomb-like silence, broken only by the screech of rusty hinges and their own ragged breaths. Their hands and faces were soon smudged with the grime of decades. The initial thrill of the chase gave way to a grinding, monotonous labor. They opened a crate of chipped Art Deco china, a trunk full of threadbare staff uniforms from the 1950s, the fabric dissolving at their touch. Another held water-damaged hotel ledgers, the ink bleeding into illegible Rorschach blots. With each empty discovery, the hope that had blazed so brightly in the penthouse dwindled. Finally, Alexander sank onto a large, leather-bound trunk, the dust puffing up around him. He buried his face in his hands. Perhaps the manifest was wrong. Perhaps someone took it years ago. A foreman, a worker. Who would know? The weight of his 30-year odyssey seemed to crush him. I have spent my life building a fortress of my own, a fortress of money and power, all to come back here and do this one thing, to honor my mother's promise. And I have failed. He looked up at Clara, his eyes hollow. I am so tired of fighting for ghosts. Clara's own exhaustion was a leaden weight in her limbs, but his words sparked something in her. Fighting for ghosts. It was what her grandfather, the historian, had done his entire life. He'd spent years arguing for the recognition of forgotten poets, for the preservation of crumbling battlefields. He had taught her that ghosts are only lost when we stop looking for them. She refused to let this one be lost. She let her eyes drift over the chaos of Bay 14C, not looking for a specific box, but for an anomaly, for something that didn't belong. Her gaze landed on the trunk Alexander was sitting on. It was different from the others. It was older, made of dark wood, bound with heavy brass straps, the kind used for ocean voyages, and unlike the other items that had clearly come from the hotel, it had no markings, no inventory tags, nothing. It was an orphan. "Alexander," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "What are you sitting on?" He looked down, his expression weary. "An old trunk. There's no hotel crest on it," she pointed out. "No asset tag. It doesn't belong to the St. Gregory." A flicker of understanding crossed his face. He stood up. Together, they dragged the heavy trunk under the dim light. The lock was a formidable piece of rusted iron. Alexander searched the debris-strewn floor and found a discarded length of steel rebar. Using it as a lever, he wedged it into the latch. With a primal grunt that echoed through the vast, silent chamber, he put his full weight into it. The wood groaned, the metal screamed, and with a deafening crack, the lock shattered. He lifted the heavy lid. The interior was lined with faded, moth-eaten velvet, and there, nestled in the center, was a small, brutally simple cast-iron safe, no larger than a shoebox. Time stopped. The dust motes dancing in the light seemed to freeze mid-air. Alexander stared, his hands hovering over the safe, as if he were afraid it was a mirage. He slowly, reverently, ran his calloused fingers over the cold, pitted metal. He reached into his trouser pocket and produced the old, tarnished brass key. His hand trembled so violently he could barely guide it toward the lock. Clara reached out and gently steadied his wrist with her own. Their eyes met for a second, a silent acknowledgement of the moment's impossible weight. He slid the key home. It fit perfectly. He turned it. A heavy, resonant clunk echoed in the stillness, the sound of a promise finally kept. He lifted the small, thick door. Inside was not a deed, not gold, but a single object. A music box, crafted from the dark, rich wood of a Caucasian walnut tree, its lid inlaid with an intricate floral pattern of mother-of-pearl. It was exquisite, a small jewel box of memory. Alexander lifted it out with the care of a man handling his own heart. He didn't open it immediately. He just held it, his eyes closed, his face a mask of raw, unfiltered emotion. A single tear escaped and traced a clean path through the grime on his cheek. "My great-grandfather," he whispered, his voice cracking. He was a cabinet maker in Tbilisi. He made this for my great-grandmother on their 50th wedding anniversary. It plays Suliko, her favorite folk song. He found a small winding key on the bottom and turned it. With a soft click, he opened the lid. A delicate, haunting melody drifted into the cold, dead air. It was a simple tune, filled with a profound and ancient sorrow, a song of love and loss, of a soul searching for a beloved's grave among the roses. The music was a living thing, a ghost of sound that filled the sub-basement with a beauty it had not known in a century. "It's beautiful," Clara whispered, her own eyes blurring with tears. "It is more than beautiful," Alexander said. "It is our memory." He reached inside the velvet-lined interior and pressed a tiny, almost invisible section of the inlay. A false bottom, seamless and perfect, sprang open with a soft sigh. Inside was a small, oilskin-wrapped packet tied with a faded silk ribbon. He carefully untied the knot and unfolded the packet. It contained a small stack of sepia-toned photographs, a proud family on the steps of a grand house, a young woman with his own pale blue eyes, a boy who was the spitting image of a 20-year-old Alexander. Beneath them were a dozen letters, the paper thin as a moth's wing, covered in an elegant, flowing Georgian script, and at the very bottom, a single, folded document, heavy and brittle with age, the deed to his family's estate. "The proof of ownership," he said, his voice thick and unrecognizable. "But this," he picked up the letters, "this is the proof of life." He unfolded the top one. "From my mother, written the night before I left. She told me to be strong. She told me to remember the music, not the silence that followed. She wrote, 'Our land is just soil and stone, Sasha. Our home is in this music. Our story is in these letters. Do not come back for the land. Come back for the story.'" He looked up at Clara, his face shattered and remade by a grief and gratitude so immense it left him breathless. "You did not just find a box. You gave me back my mother's voice." In the weeks that followed, the St. Gregory Grand began to breathe again. The change was subtle at first, then profound. It wasn't in the new, historically accurate damask wallpaper Clara sourced for the Palm Court, or the restored gas lamps she had polished and reinstalled in the lobby. It was in the air. Alexander Volkov, always dressed in simple, impeccably tailored suits of charcoal grey, became the hotel's quiet, steady heartbeat. He learned the name of every housekeeper, knew the birthdays of the dishwasher's children, and often took his lunch in the bustling employee cafeteria, listening more than he spoke. He didn't manage from the penthouse. He managed from the floors, walking the halls, his presence a silent testament to a new philosophy. The foundation of the hotel was not the granite beneath it, but the people within it. Clara's world had been remade. Her official title was Director of Archives and Restoration, a position Alexander had created for her. It was a role that fit her like a second skin. She spent her days in the hotel's dusty archives, her nights poring over blueprints and historical photographs. She was a detective of time, piecing together the hotel's grand narrative. The crushing weight of her grandfather's medical bills was gone, paid in full with a single check. She had moved into a sunlit apartment in Beacon Hill, where she could see the Charles River from her window. But the true change was internal. She walked through the opulent lobby no longer as an invisible servant, but as its custodian, its storyteller. The deference she received from the staff was unnerving at first, but she quickly learned to wear her authority with a quiet grace her grandfather would have admired. One crisp November evening, she was standing in the lobby, supervising the placement of the first exhibit for the small historical museum she was curating. It was the walnut music box, resting on a bed of dark velvet inside a climate-controlled glass case. Alexander appeared beside her, his footsteps silent on the newly installed Persian rug. "A fitting first chapter for our new story," he said softly. "It's the heart of the story," she corrected gently. He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that reached his eyes. "You are right, of course." He looked around the lobby, at the warm, welcoming light, at the guests mingling with smiling staff. It was a world away from the cold, sterile stage of judgment he had walked on to months before. "I still keep the coat," he said, his gaze distant. "And the boots. They are in the back of my closet. Sometimes I look at them to remind myself that a man is not what he wears or what he owns. A man is what he is willing to endure for the sake of a promise." He turned to her, holding out a small, flat velvet box. "This is for you." Clara opened it. Inside, resting on a bed of white silk, was not a pin, but a key. It was solid gold, an exact replica of the old, tarnished brass key that had opened the safe. But at its head, where the ornate fob had been, was a single, flawlessly cut diamond that caught the light of the chandeliers and fractured it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. "It opens no physical doors," Alexander said. "Its purpose is symbolic. It is the key to the archives, to the penthouse, to any room in this hotel. It is a key to this place's past and to its future. It belongs to you. You are the keeper of the story now, Clara." Clara lifted the key, its weight solid and meaningful in her palm. She thought of her grandfather, who had given her the key to understanding a language which had, in turn, allowed her to unlock a man's soul. She thought of the chain of events, the small, seemingly insignificant choice to speak, to listen, to act with compassion in the face of cruelty. It was a choice that had not only resurrected one man's past, but had forged her own future from its ashes. "Thank you, Alexander," she said, her voice full of a quiet, unshakable certainty. "I will take a good care of it." She looked from the key in her hand to the music box in its case, and then out at the grand, living hotel around her. History, her grandfather had taught her, was a conversation between the past and the present. Here, in the heart of the St. Gregory Grand, surrounded by the ghosts she had helped to honor, Clara finally understood. She hadn't just found a job or a purpose. She had found her place in the story. And it was just beginning.